Can you hear the motor in the background? Is that gonna be a problem? I can turn it off.
I don't hear a motor.
Okay, cool. Neither do I then.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I see your comments from time to time, and they're usually good stuff. I like the one about how COVID knows when you are or not seated at a restaurant.
Oh, those are the spicy hot takes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Science, apparently. Yeah.
So, where do you? I mean, I've been reading about all the stuff that you've been doing with consoles and shrinking boards and all of that. How does this kind of move in the culture towards not being, copyright being as overreaching as it is, and trademark law and intellectual property law being overreaching? How does that affect people like you? Because I know how it affects me.
Oh, when
I'm
I
very
when I'm
sensitive.
when I'm modifying like my controllers for persons with disabilities.
Yes.
Well, I've never had a problem with it. I actually get a lot of accolades, especially from Microsoft, because they're obviously very pro for more people being able to play stuff. I would say though, so I don't really have a problem with it from a legal perspective, but there's definitely I find problems with like the repairability or the modability of things, which is probably I'm sure you come across the same sort of things with your work.
Yeah, it's kind of similar, but I mean, the way you make it sound like the company is actually happy that you're doing what you're doing.
Oh yeah, Microsoft loves me. To quote them, "You buy a lot of our shit." That's how they put it. But other companies that you could probably guess them, the names of, aren't usually as they don't usually like you to mess around with stuff as much, or they're very very protective of their trademark. It just really depends. I mean, there's different cultures between different companies.
I was really surprised that Microsoft would have been on the list of companies that was happy.
They're one of the more cuddly friendly giant corporations, strangely enough. Yeah, I have never had a problem with Microsoft. Um, Apple's a different story, but yeah.
Have you tried to do anything with Apple or no?
No, they just get really well. I shouldn't say, but yeah, they are very protective of copyright. Of course, all companies are supposed to be because if you don't fight for copyright, you can lose it. Kind of like with the Red Cross thing, like they have to be dicks about that cross being a trademark. Otherwise, you can lose the mark if you aren't shown to be actively fighting for it. But as far as the stuff that I do, I've never really had that much issue with it. However, I mean, I do notice as time goes by, the repairability of things can change. I don't really have. Do I have a new one? Actually, yeah, there's something right here within arm's reach. I mean, this is just a small example, but like with these Xbox controllers, this is the 2013 model. See the large pads around the mounts for the vias?
Yes.
Those are fairly easy to desolder. Of course, they're lead free, which is a little more difficult than it was in the past. But then on the newer controllers that I don't have any examples of right now in front of me, those pads are much smaller, and it's like, then you can't get as good of contact with your gun to like heat it up.
I
And
have
there's
the old version of that. I have the Hacko 808, the one that's all black, but that heats up. You have to wait 6 minutes for it to heat up.
oh, this is supposed to be faster than 6 minutes. I usually wait at least five, no matter what.
Oh, I
Just
guess it hasn't changed then.
I don't know. I just want to make sure that's nice and hot, because it doesn't tell you that it's a temperature. It'd be nice if there was like a blinking light or something. 'Cause, you got the dial on the bottom, but that's all analog anyway. But so even things like changing the size of pads, it can make it more likely for the pad to be damaged or rip up because there's less glue holding it to the substrate. So yeah, I don't. And then like with PlayStation, this is just from my stuff, of course, but they're always using like silkscreen circuits. So there's nothing inside here you can solder. Actually, this is a little bit better than PlayStation 4, but it's very modder unfriendly. I don't think it's necessarily on purpose, but compared to like the Xbox, it's much more painful. Like if I knew an accessibility controllers with this, I usually would use like an off brand just because it does test points.
So what do you mean it's silkscreen, no solderability? You mean like this? You would have to scrape to?
Yeah, let me see if I can find an example of my box of junk here. Um, oh, hold on. I've got one in my notebook. So how things doing over there? You're still in New York, right?
Unfortunately, yes. Yeah.
they use one of these, a silkscreen printed circuit, like a keyboard.
Uh-huh. Oh, that's...
But then the part where it contacts a circuit board has a carbon contact. But the problem is, it's not just that. The entire circuit board's purple or dark blue, so you can't see anything. There's no test points. And it's just really hard to modify compared to Xbox. So that's why when I've done accessibility work, I usually do it on the Xbox because the controllers are just easier to modify for people.
Is there any reason to make it like that? Is it water resistant or more drop resistant? Or because
Sony just
it's too cheap for me to imagine anybody's going to go out there to try and keep you from fixing it.
No, I think it's just because Sony over-engineers everything, and they try to make it way too complicated, and they make a new revision of their hardware like every year, whereas Microsoft is a little bit more conservative, and they only change it like twice in a generation. It just, I don't know, it just sucks. I'd like to do more stuff at PlayStation, but...
What are you modding on controllers? The last time I remember using different controllers, I was buying like the Mad Catz one so I could cheat in Street Fighter in 1997.
Oh! No, I actually modified video game controllers for persons with disabilities, like if they don't have both hands.
Oh.
You know, you can't do this if you don't have both your hands.
Yeah. Point.
Oh, shoot. I don't have any... Do I have anything partially... I mean, as soon as I build them, they go out the door, you know?
Yeah,
so I'll do stuff like... I'll get like a third party... Actually, speaking of third party... like the little Hori controller. Actually, do I have... Oh, actually, here's... Yeah, there's the PlayStation 4. So most of it's silkscreen, and then you've got that contact. And it's much more difficult than like this little guy where there's just a test point for every button.
So how do you do those ones where it's all silkscreen?
You don't, basically. You could sit there. So I've been doing these controllers for disabled persons for 15 years now. So if I have to sit there and scrape away and do micro soldering for every customer, I can't. It just takes too long. So what I discovered is you get like these third-party controllers. Mm-hmm. They still work. They're corded. But every button has a test point. It's just like a nice green circuit board with perfectly labeled test points. Like this is this button. This is that button. You solder to that and boom.
So how do you make it work for someone with one hand, let's say?
Right. So like with this one, you remove the back, and then there's a 3D printed replacement for the back. See? Oh. Let me just approximate this for you. Then you've got this joystick interface. Obviously, nothing screwed together. That goes into a shaft. I'm all about 3D printing, you know. It kind of starts to go like that. Can you see?
Yes.
And then there's an additional trigger here. So you put both of the triggers on one side.
Oh, that's cool.
And then these get duplicated to that side. And then the analog that they can't reach, because let's say they're left-handed, that analog is transposed down here. That's actuated against their leg.
That's great.
And of course, there's a right-hand version as well.
I can't imagine I can play a game like that. I can't even play a game with both hands half the time.
Oh, it takes some getting used to. I mean, I've tried and I'm not very good at it, but yeah, I sold quite a few of these. I think last year I sold like a record, like I built like 130 of these last year for people. So yeah, I've been doing this for like 15 years now.
How'd you get into doing this?
Yeah, it was 2006. So, you know, I've been around forever, right? For like 20 years on the internet. It was 2006. This guy, I think he saw one of my mods. He's like, I just got back from Iraq and got one of my arms blown off in an IED or whatever those bombs are called.
Ouch.
And he comes back and he's like, but now I can't play video games. Because if you think about it, that was like the first war of the Gen X video game generation. You know, where video games were a hobby. You know, obviously they weren't like in the 40s. And so I'm like, oh yeah, that's a good point. And I'd never thought about that. You know, you can't do this, right? Unless you have both hands. So I'm like, well, this is a very interesting problem. I would love to solve this for you. And this is back Xbox 360 days. So I made this like really elaborate, like overly designed thing, but it was like a left-handed controller. And he's like, oh yeah, that's perfect. Anyway, then I put it on my website, and then, you know, 15 years later, I'm still doing it for people. Yeah, I was even doing that while I was doing my show because I didn't have enough work to do, apparently. Yeah, but then besides that, I've also done a lot of, well, I've modded just pretty much every video game console ever. But nowadays, I mostly do like new design work, and then I build these controllers for people.
So we were
So
just talking about this with I fix it in some of and I think it was some of the 1201 DMCA stuff where they're looking for exemptions for certain items. And one of the questions that I had was, if you were an anti-right to repair lobbyist, what is your best argument if you would just put on your fake suit and tie for why you should not be able to replace your own optical drive in the console?
well, the first thing they'd probably go to is like safety issues. I mean, the one thing I was thinking about before talking with you is I think a lot of it could be an ag list of cars. Like, oh, you can't do this because this could blow up, or you can't do this because this could blow up. So you would definitely go for safety. I mean, obviously the anti lobbyist, is that correct? I guess that's the right way to put it.
Anti-right to repair lobbyist, yeah.
Right. They're doing it because big companies are shoving money down their pants, right? But they have to come up with a excuse for why you allegedly can't do it. Um, I actually remember talking to Microsoft about something like this a long time ago. As I said, they don't hate me, but I was like, it'd be really great. This is long. Do they hate
better
you?
relationships with the OEMs that you work with?
Well, I don't know, but anyway,
More charming.
I don't know. You're quite charming yourself, but I don't know. Maybe because I've been around forever. Anyway, what I was saying was I mentioned to them. I'm like, hey, this is probably like 10 years ago. I think it was an E3 or something, and oh yeah, no, I was hanging out with some employees because I ran into them at the Minneapolis airport, and so we were like out getting drunk in Vegas. That's right, it was Vegas, not E3. And I'm like, hey, it'd be really cool if you just had like a brain box, like a black box controller with all the test points, make it super easy, and then people, could modify it. And one of their reasons for not doing that was because it creates attack vectors. Because it's kind of like the Raspberry Pi, where it was intended for education and for like, underprivileged kids, and then it became like a retro emulation box instead. You're like, most of the time it has nothing to do with the original education purpose. So they're like, well, yeah, if we did that, then people could, they could do try to do source code injections. They could obviously cheat in the video games. And that's a big reason why they didn't want to open it up. So even though, they appreciated what I wanted to do, they're like, well, here's the reasons why we wouldn't do that from a corporate level. And I mean, you talk about a company like Apple or Microsoft and their levels of bureaucracy and legal it's like a government in itself. It's pretty labyrinthian. So I mean, there's probably things that we wouldn't even think of that a lawyer would, because that's their job. Now, whether or not it's right is another question. However, I know that is kind of one of the issues. But then, of course, years later, Microsoft did release that. What they call that? The Microsoft. They made that thing like that accessibility controller. I can't remember the name of it. And I was like, oh, no one's ever going to buy my stuff again. But they kept doing it because this modular system they made, you had to plug in a different device for everything. So your $120 controller became like a $500 controller. So
Jesus,
kind of weird how that worked. Yeah. Yeah. So as far as that's concerned, I mean, I definitely, as far as the legality of the anti stuff, I keep thinking about cars. I know I'm kind of getting hung up on that, but maybe not even just like your optical drive, but I think where they could really get you is with intellectual property, like the intellectual property, the hardware of the optical drive, like the code that's in it, what's been flashed to like the microcontrollers. Like they could say, hey, just possessing that source code and installing it yourself, that could be in breach. I think that's probably how they try to get you, and maybe what they'll do in the future, like especially with like vehicles.
yeah, because I know someone was bringing up the tire pressure sensor, and
Yes.
he showed the cartoon with the guy trying to get his tire pressure sensor adjusted, and he was on the side of the road, and a policeman said you're trying to because the reason he brought up the policeman trying to stop him from doing that is because this is against the law. It comes with a six-figure fines and criminal penalties. You can go to jail for this for up I think the figure he gave is something like 7 or 8 years for bypassing software locks under the DMCA. Does the DMCA interfere with any of what you do?
I've never had a problem. Of course, I'm just taking existing devices and modifying them. I'm not hacking their firmware. I'm not changing the code. I'm not trying to make them operate in a way they're not intended to. Actually, speaking of that, because I was playing around with one. They had that Nintendo Game & Watch, that little handheld, that new one. I don't know if you saw that. It came out like in Christmas. So these hackers immediately hacked it. Of course they did, right? And I think Nintendo of course, it was Nintendo. Got out. I think they had to take down all their YouTube how-tos of how to do it. But the thing that's dumb is you crack that thing open, and the chip. Actually, like right now, I'm working on one of those old Nintendo Game and Watch tabletops. This is a Mario Cement Factory. This one's actually quite rare.
Wow.
And well, I can't see it from this angle, but that is actually Nintendo Silicon, even back in 1982, right?
Jeez.
The reason I bring that up, well, not just because it was sitting on my desk. You crack open that little new Game & Watch thing, the main CPU, it's just an off-the-shelf ST Microelectronics ARM chip. You can buy it from DigiKey anywhere you want, right? The chip, nothing in it is proprietary except for the code. And yeah, I think that could be the problem. Like, you could say, oh, I'm going to swap out the chip from my airbag controller. You would not believe how much hardware is in an airbag controller. It's ridiculous. But you could, yeah, there's nothing stopping you from going to DigiKey or Newark or whatever, buying the chip, sticking it in. But when it comes to actually flashing the code on it, that's where they could get you. And they could also make those chips secure. So they basically, you can either read the code or you can't write it back or you can't even read it, right? And that's the problem they have with the Nintendo Game & Watch I was talking about. They actually were able to do it by doing a code injection, like a buffer overflow kind of thing. And that allowed them to unlock the chip, and then they could figure out how the encryption was done. And that's what pissed off Nintendo. But I'm just saying, so even if you have a part that is off the shelf, it's not like it's a missile control chip, regular old ARM chip, the code on it is what makes it locked to proprietary and gives the company all the leverage. And I think that's kind of the issue, especially when you have cars where, yeah, you know, because some Ford Broncos rolled over, now you have to have a little computer in every one of your wheels. And that's only getting worse for the cars too.
Tell me about that with the Ford Bronco. What do you mean by that?
Oh, no, the Ford. Oh, I believe it was the Ford Explorer. I think it was like the 2007, 2008, that era. The Ford Explorers they had a huge rollover problem.
Go Ford.
And
buy American.
Yeah, they had a huge rollover problem. And then it was determined to be, oh, yes. The this is so stupid. This is like the hot coffee label on McDonald's. The owner's manual said inflate your tires to something like really high, like 45 PSI or something. And the owners were like, that is too high. I've never had a car over 35. So people were underinflating their tires. And that was contributing to the rollovers because the recommended tire pressure seemed too high to the owners. And because of that, that is why all cars have a tire pressure sensor in every wheel, even if it's a piece of junk Kia.
Because people were overinflating the tire.
They were underinflating their tire. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So people basically, yeah, the tires were underinflated. That was causing stability issues, causing the vehicles to have a higher rate of rollover. So it's like, you idiots, you're supposed to have 65 PSI and you're choosing to have a lower PSI because you think 65 is too high. Therefore, we're going to force you to have a high PSI by controlling it with the computer. But yeah, now you have to go ahead.
Was this actually about the amount of what was inflated in the tires, or was this just a shitty vehicle design that was making it flip over? Or are people just focusing on that vehicle even though other vehicles that were similarly made would flip over and it's the same circumstance?
I don't know the ins and outs of the case entirely. I'm just giving you the cliff notes from what I've heard. But yeah, it was a Ford Explorer. I believe it was around 2007. Yes, and I believe it was rolling over a lot because of tire pressure issues. And I believe the tire pressure issues stemmed from the tires needing to be inflated higher than the customers were used to. Therefore, the customers were not keeping the tires inflated enough. And therefore, now we have sensors to basically say, beep, 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 you're under 50 PSI, beep. I mean, my car's like 35 PSI. So yeah, I would say, yeah, that does seem high. But yes, that does stem specifically from, I believe it was a Ford Explorers in like the late 2000s.
Wow.
And now it's in every car.
We have a similar issue with the chipsets, which is where, the chip that reads the battery and tells, what the what percentage of it is left, it dies often because it has a data line that's 3 volts and it's right next to the 16-volt charging line on the MacBook. Because
yeah, I've seen your videos about that.
Yeah, and it's like, you can buy the chip, but it doesn't come with programming. And if you actually try to read the programming off of the existing chip, it erases itself, kind of like Jack Bauer trying to, going after a terrorist right before he takes a cyanide bill, so he doesn't tell him where the bomb is. And the issue that you have to find another board that has that chip on it that that works. And when you buy a donor board, you don't know if the board that you're buying became a donor board because that chip is dead. And it is insanely frustrating and aggravating to deal with.
And that's all because you don't have access to the code.
I wouldn't even say give me access to the source code. I like, just the binary that goes on the chip.
The binary could be reverse engineered. It can be disassembled.
You're being so I usually say that I can't do that. So you would make an amazing anti-right to repair lobbyist right here. So how does that work? How would you be able to disassemble a binary? You have 4 minutes.
NSA has a tool like that Ghidra tool. It can do things like that. They've actually used that to restore like old software. So I assume you're rebroadcasting this. So for people who don't know, you have a language like C and your microchip runs in machine language or assembly language. So your high level language such as C is compiled down into binary byte code that the CPU can execute. And that's machine language or called a binary file or a hex file. They're more or less the same thing. And that's just a bunch of strings of ones and zeros. But however, they all involve opcodes. So if you see the beginning of your code, let's say you've got the number 168. Let's say that means load accumulator A. So that means the next two characters after it are an accumulator value. So basically by analyzing the sequence of bytes, it's called disassembly. You can disassemble the string of hex values into what looks like a machine language program. And then once you have the machine language program, you basically have the code. It's called disassembly.
So is this only something that you can do with, let's say, something really low level like an SMC chip, or is this something that you could do with, advanced software as well? I imagine this is only something
you mean to perform the disassembly or do the disassembly on?
To perform the disassembly, doing the disassembly on.
Oh no, disassembly is super easy. We've been doing it for decades. It's like pocket watch shit. It's so easy because you're just assembling in reverse. So you just have a list of opcodes. If you really want to get really pedantic about it, like let's say you have like an opcode for like load accumulator, which is like a CPU kind of thing, and like let's say you have load accumulator immediate or load accumulator from RAM, and it's the same function load accumulator, but it has two different sources, either getting it from the RAM or your program. So you'd have like let's say you have a opcode of 160 or 162. So if it's a 160, then that means there's only one byte after it that needs to be analyzed. If it's 162, that means it takes the next two bytes after it. But again, all the chips, any microcontroller, any CPU is all off the shelf. All the opcodes are known. So by knowing how the assembly or machine language of a chip works, you can create a disassembler, and they exist for everything. Even when you do development, like I do in C, you can assemble the code, and that's actually what gets flashed to the chip. But then right there, boom, is a disassembly as well. So you can see how your C code was turned into machine language code. Well, I should say assembly code, like LDA5, jump JSR 15. That's what the C gets turned into, and then that gets turned into bytes. But, I don't know assembly very well, but if you can get the binary just up to disassembled assembly, that's enough. That's enough for people to redo the entire thing.
So so if the SMC chip is what has code in it that tells the operating system, I am a MacBook, I'm not some random other PC. In theory, if you had access to that binary, then you would be able to get the source code out of it, figure out how they're doing that, and then redo that on your own chip so that you could have, let's say, any computer run OS X without having to deal with Hackintosh level crap.
Yes, it's all built into the security of the chips, and that's why they protect it with their IP. Because if it wasn't for that, you could basically Hackintosh your way to the moon. What's the SMC chip again?
System management controller. So it deals with
okay.
Turn on, turn off, sensors for temperature, what percentage is the battery, how hot is the CPU, all that stuff.
Now, is that a custom Apple product or is that something third party?
That is just some generic old chip that they put their own custom firmware blob on.
Okay, you're right. So if that's why you said like if you tried to read it, it erases itself or something like that?
Yeah, I haven't tried to do this in a really long time, but I remember my friend Duke on the forum said if you try to read it, it erases itself.
Right. So that is exactly like Jack Bauer taking a suicide pill. Obviously, he's too tough. He would never do that. That's like the newbie terrorist hunter taking a suicide pill with a cute wife back home. And and of course, he's going to die. Yes, because even if, a hex file, binary file. I'm sorry. Binary file. It's like, okay, anything, as long as you had the data, it could be disassembled and then you would know how it worked. Yes, you'd have to be a decent assembly language programmer, but there's millions of those.
So
And that,
realistically speaking, they actually have a point when they say that what they are asking for is source code. Even if we're not asking for source code, we're asking for the binary. The binary is enough to get the source code.
correct. Yes. Through
Well, that
disassembly.
sucks. Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, what you could possibly do in that, because, well, here's the thing, like, if you had that chip, even if you, as long as you knew exactly how it worked, you could program another off-the-shelf microcontroller to perform its same functions. It wouldn't even have to be the same chip. I mean, obviously, it probably has to have the same landing pad. But that's why they're so anal about destroying the code, is because, yes, even the binary is enough to reverse engineer the assembly language functionality of the program. And once you had that, you could replace it with anything, even if it was some sort of like drop-in motherboard module or, like dead bug kind of thing.
It's interesting because then it really does go back and forth into how do you make that something that's fair for the manufacturer and for the repair person. Because I think having it skewed to the point where if your machine stops reading a battery, you have to rip that chip off of another device in order to fix it is kind of ridiculous. But at the same time, I don't feel like I should come up with something that requires they make source code available.
Well, then, if that's the case, I mean, I could understand, from a IP standpoint, why they want to say that. It's not necessarily fair, but it is their property. But then they should at least say, okay, here's your pre-flashed chip. If you try to read the code, it's going to suicide pill, but at least we provide this for you so you can repair it. But that's when you get into Apple making $1 trillion because they like to fix stuff for you, and they pay people peanuts, I'm sure, even. You know what I mean? Like they're like Goombas at the Apple store. They pay them shit, and they use that as their what they call devices and services division, which is like where they make the real money.
Yeah, they say that they don't make money off of repairs, but they don't clarify as to whether or not that means warranty repairs or actual paid repairs. I mean, I could say I don't make money off of fixing things if I solely pointed out customers that came back for warranty after we screwed something up. If I have a tech work on something 3 or 4 times, obviously I don't make any money. They've never really clarified that, which is a bit strange. But so yeah, making it. I also wanted to avoid putting them in a situation where they become the person who is forced to become a part seller, because that's a bit of a pain in the ass. But that's the only thing that seems to make sense would be if you want to have a chip that is specific to this, that is necessary for the primary function of the device, and you don't want to make of the binary available, then you sell the chip.
Right. But that's where they have leverage. We're like, okay, even if you could somehow reverse engineer it, they could still come after you for infringement because you're able to do it. You remember the Nintendo Game Boy? Of course you do.
Yeah, my last one was in advance. My last thing with portable gaming was when I had to use a worm light.
Oh, okay.
Or if my battery was almost dead and like I was on Mario where you can't save and it was really late, I would ask my dad if he can we go home in a half hour to stay by the stoplight, this street light.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You're like at least a decade younger than me, right? You're like in your 30s or something.
Yeah, I'm gonna be 33 this year.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you're a young kid then. Cool. The reason I bring up the Game Boy, so the original Nintendo 85, it had a security chip in it, 2 of them actually. And one was in the Nintendo and one was in the cartridge, and they talked to each other. And if that chip wasn't there, your cartridge wouldn't boot. That's why you had to blow in the cartridge and everything. But Nintendo is cheap. So when they got to the Game Boy, this is relevant to the discussion. Just wait for it. When they got to the Game Boy, on the OG Game Boy, you turn it on and the Nintendo logo comes down and goes ding in the middle of the screen. That was actually the copyright protection. So in the Game Boy's CPU ROM, like the base code, like the firmware, they had a copy of that bit pattern that said Nintendo, just like a 1-bit bitmap, right? And if the cartridge did not match that bit pattern in the beginning of memory, that matched the bit pattern on the CPU, the Game Boy would not turn on. And you're probably thinking, why does that matter? Well, it matters because if a third-party developer put the bitplane graphic of the word Nintendo logo on their cartridge, then boom, Nintendo gets them for trademark infringement. So that's how they did that. It's there's always a way. And so that's not even technology. That's basically baking your typographic logo into your hardware. And then if people have to use that as the unlock key, oh, you drew the word Nintendo in pixels, you get sued. So that kind of stuff's been going on for a long time.
Yeah, I remember reading a case where someone, this was a long time ago. I don't remember the exact name of it, where someone was trying to say that there was a complaint about a schematic being released because it was their, I think, like, copyrighted, and there was a case that said you can't say that that's copyright because it's literally just a drawing of how it's put together. So they put
Hmm.
artwork on the schematic, and they said that's my artwork, and the side of the schematic, like next to the board in the resistors, you have a picture of a guy or something, and that's my drawing.
It was a transformative work.
Yeah, it was a transformative work. What would be interesting in that case would be, so Nintendo was saying when that dropped, that was our copyright there that you were infringed. Because like when you're replacing a system management controller chip on the board, nobody's ever going to know if that's the original one or if I have a copy of the firmware that I got from somewhere and I reversed engineered it. At the end of the day, there's no way to actually tell.
Correct. But Apple just wants you to buy a new device because here's an analogy. I mean, here's something to think about. Like a TV, right? Like that TV there. You can buy a TV now for $500. It'll last you 10 years easy. Would you agree?
Yes.
All these companies got addicted to a $600 thing that goes into your pocket, falls on the floor, and if you're lucky, you get 2 years out of it. They became addicted to the destructive, expensive nature of cell phones. Like, you don't buy a TV every 2 years, but most people buy a phone every 2 years, and they get all smashed up. So there's big bucks in just destruction, really. Kind of like, you ever hear the Super Beetle, the sequel to the first Beetle car?
No.
The Volkswagen Beetle, it was like, the people's car designed by Porsche. Lasted forever. So they actually, I think it was like the early 70s, they actually designed the Super Beetle, and it was specifically designed to break because the original one never broke, and that affects sales. So companies get too addicted to how easy it is to break these stupid pieces of, these things are made so freaking flimsy. Like, why does it have to be glass? I know why, because it can't be metal, but they love that. It's a profit center for them. The fact that you're destroying a $600 thing. Like, if you had to buy a new TV every 2 years for $500, you wouldn't. But of course, we aren't pulling a TV out of our pocket 20 times a day. So the destruction, remember that movie Fifth Element where Zorg is like, destruction brings chaos and order and money.
I never
That's
saw
what
that.
it's great. The villain is basically, he wants the world to be destroyed because it'll be great for his capitalistic endeavors because you have to rebuild it. And I think that's what happens with these devices. The fact that they get destroyed, especially a phone, it's big money, and there's really no profit in designing things to be, long lasting. Like, you talk about the 3.3 volt line right next to a high voltage line. I was thinking about your video about that a couple of weeks ago. I was taking something apart, and it was some cheapy little thing. It was like a Palm Pilot or something. It wasn't no, $3,000 Mac. And they had a ribbon cable, and they had the high voltage line as far as possible, from the regular voltage lines. Like, they knew, but a $1.2 trillion company can't figure it out.
They haven't fixed that. And they still have. It's been 5 years. They still do that. 1.7 volt next to 52 volts, straight to CPU.
Oh, but they
Keep in mind if it was like a $5 chip it's going to. It goes to the soldered on CPU.
I know. Well, they don't care until enough people. Well, what is it? A very small minority of our customers. That's their line, right?
Yeah, I did this one. I remember there's one video I did where I kind of did a mashup of all the different times they said it with the different vocabulary, like a small percentage, a very small percentage, a small number, a very small number. Like, it gets more passive aggressive as time goes on.
Mm-hmm. They're sitting there fuming, fuming lawyers. Actually, speaking about that, well, I don't know. Did you want to talk more about intellectual property on microcontrollers before? Well, no, I was asking you if you wanted to talk about that more.
I didn't have any more questions. I had that question, and your answer actually gives me it lets me understand a manufacturer concern that I didn't have before. That would allow me to come up with a bill that's more fair for the manufacturer.
Right. Yeah, you're right. I would make a really good anti-right to repair lobbyist because, well,
it pays well.
But the thing is, I think you do need to think about that because it's like being a lawyer or like playing chess. You have to anticipate what they're going to say in order to have a comeback to it. And so, yes, if they don't want you to disassemble their code, then you should at least be able to get the part, right? Like, I can't ask Windows to give me their source code for Windows, but I can buy a new copy of Windows. But I mean, we're getting to a place now where they're using they're using IP or proprietary data on microcontrollers, on system controller buses or whatever you're talking about. They're using that as a way to silo as much work as possible toward a smaller and smaller percentage of repair things. Like Teslas are really expensive to insure, even with all the safety stuff, because there aren't very many places to get them fixed. So you can't, I can go to there's like 3 auto shops like within walking distance of where I live, but I don't even know where the Tesla dealer is, even though I
I
see
always
Tesla
thought the
driving
insurance
around.
being expensive was because they know if you own a Tesla that you probably have a lot of money and slash or are a pretentious asshole. Therefore, they can charge you more money for it.
Oh, so they're like Apple.
No, I mean, like when you go to a garage, they'll literally just say if you have an expensive car, it costs you more for the exact same parking space. Like I just figured it was something like that.
There's an episode of the Cosby Show like that. Maybe that's not PC to bring up, but he's going to buy a car, and then he dresses all down. He dresses down because he doesn't want him to know he's a doctor. Same kind of thing. No, I heard it's because there's fewer repair options, so you have to wait longer to get into the repairs. Even that, like, oh, I have to wait a month to get my Tesla repaired. That means the insurance company has to get you a rental car for a month. Those things can add up. Yeah, but you kind of see that where when you have proprietary items, then if you don't sell them to people, it silos or reduces the amount of options that people have for repair. Like, oh, instead of having 5 stores, I only got 1. And politicians are allegedly against that kind of stuff, like when it comes to voting, but apparently when it's like Apple or Tesla, they're all for it.
I
Oh, I
sometimes
need to.
wonder if it's feigned ignorance or they just don't care.
I mean, they're out there. 1 second, I got to turn my UV back on. I mean, they're all pretty old. I mean, do you really think they probably can't even program a VCR, let alone understand a cell phone?
I spoke to one in Maine, and he said that he hadn't been. One of the constituents said, I'm surprised that you're this interested in it. I emailed and never heard back, and he said I haven't been able to log into my government issued email since I was elected. And then everybody around just kind of looked, and they had this face turned white. It's just like, really?
See, that's the thing where if it's like, let's say it's like a courtroom movie, you've got the guy and he's like, I don't support right to repair. And I'll email Apple as soon as I figure out how to log into my account. And then everyone's like, and then like you realize, yeah, they're technologically ignorant and they're trying to legislate technology. Yeah, I mean, I would think as far as like how to go about it, because you're looking for a direct ballot initiative in New York, I assume.
I was looking for one in Massachusetts. We don't have a system for direct ballot in New York.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that is something that they already did once in Massachusetts, and they were successful. And so I
Mm-hmm.
figured, let's do it again, but just cross out car and write in consumer electronics and see what happens.
Oh, so they did do one for car.
Yeah, and it succeeded. It succeeded twice. There was the first one that was passed, and there was a second one that closed the wireless loophole.
Well, I would think that would definitely be a way to go because everyone understands cars. Even an 80-year-old grandma understands cars. So if you're going to draft legislation or have ads or whatever for it, you probably need to think about it like that. Like what if opening the hood of your car broke your windshield? That would happen with a phone trying to repair it. Or what if you could be fined for swapping your spark plugs? Maybe you could. Actually, I was looking at OBD sensors just today. Yeah, but everyone understands that, and I'm sure most people would argue that a phone or a computer is just as ubiquitous and essential to life as a car is nowadays. So I would say probably try to tug on those heartstrings because the thing is, as you well know, and farmers know, this shit is coming toward cars. It's coming to cars sooner than we think. So
It's
we
already
might,
here.
yeah, it's ridiculous. And I think the thing is, they put all this stuff in cars. The reason they do it is because it's cheap. Like an LCD screen and a camera and a CPU, that doesn't cost anything. It's really pretty cheap in the grand scheme of things. So it's like, ooh, look at my car. It's all fancy. It can drive itself. But every one of those components is an IP or repair booby trap. Like it's one more thing that your guy down the street isn't going to be able to do. But the dealership can do it, or Tesla can do it.
No,
Because it's fun.
I have no illusions when Tesla has a car that has no dials or anything on it. That's not because it's futuristic. That's because it's fucking cheap to put some like knockoff looking iPad in the center rather than like RPM, speedometer.
This is
Eh,
so cheap compared to dials and knobs.
Yes.
It's dirt cheap. Yes.
It's
You,
easier
you,
to assemble too.
yeah, yeah. No, you've totally got it. That's why. That is exactly why they do it. It's even like what I was talking about, like breaking your windshield when you open. Like that's why they glue these things together. Is because like screws, they have to sit there and think, okay, how long does this take? Oh my God, that took 1 second. Let's just glue it together. Speaking of Teslas, I was at their plant once. They actually glue the cars together. They only weld them just enough for the glue to cure. So it's like, like when you put two things together with rubber cement, and then you put something on it to hold it. That's all the welds do. The welds just hold the glue in place. It's nuts. Yeah, I mean, I think about that too. It's like you used to be able to take things apart, and I don't know. It's so hard now, and I think it's a double-edged sword. Like we all want a sleek, sexy looking, because I got Pixel 2. It's so advanced, right? But why couldn't there be screw holes on the back, right? I mean, you can go down to the grocery store and buy a $50 piece of crap prepaid phone for $50. But guess what? You can peel the back off, battery, SD card. I mean, there
Yeah,
is
cheap tablets too. Like you just use your finger, and all you need is your fingernails with a cheap tablet.
yeah, and there are like when you were talking about in your videos about a year ago about how Apple they removed the M2 slot from the laptops, correct?
Yeah.
And then they removed the header to dump the data from the soldered on SSD chips.
Yes.
They do that because ports and headers and connectors are very expensive. There's some of the most expensive things on their motherboard. So in those situations, they're just trying to be cheap. However, also people want things as slim as possible. So we've kind of brought it on ourselves where we will trade repairability for sexiness. And I don't know, maybe I think we could do better because right now a cell phone is like a car without a hood. It's like with a welded shut hood.
It's probably the greatest red pill moment would be realizing that a lot of the reason that cell phones are not as repairable is because it's possible that people don't want certain things to be repairable. Like there's one aspect of it where a chip not being available, that's just bullshit. Nobody's advocating for that. But the not having screws in the back of a phone, that there would be a bunch of reviewers on YouTube saying, "Look at how ugly this is. There's visible screw. What is this rubber grommet over a screw hole? Ew." Like this thing that's been driving me insane for like 5 or 7 years is this whole thing with bezels. I hate this trend of no bezel. I miss being able to like bonk, no case. Oh, look, it's not cracked. I love bezels. They're amazing. They give me something to grab the phone with, but also it keeps it from breaking when I drop it.
Yeah, but the companies want it to break. I mean, let's be honest.
And I sometimes kind of wonder if people want it to break, because like someone may say, I can't afford a new one. But if you have to get a new one, well, then listen, it's not like I want to pay for a new one, but the old one's so slow and it's cracked because it has no bezel and whatever. Like,
yeah, just by having a very slight lip right here, you could probably reduce about 90% of glass crackage. But no, it has to be flat. You know what I realized? I used to travel all the freaking time when I was doing my show. So I was in airports a lot. And Apple finally, and maybe this extends to cell phones as well, but Apple finally clicked in my mind when I realized, they'd have a case, but there's a hole in it so people could see the logo, that they could see that they had an Apple phone. And I'm like, oh, these are fashion accessories. That's what these have become.
Oh God.
Think about it. Why is there a hole in the back of a case for an Apple phone? It's so people can see you have an Apple phone.
I don't even think there's a logo on it. It has a very tiny logo on it, but it's covered by the case, and I could give a crap less if someone knows I have an LG.
Right, but again, we don't paint our nails or it's a fashion statement. So they want something sexy, no bezel. Ooh, take it to the bar. Look, there's no bezel. Ooh, oops, I dropped it. Well, I guess I go get another one. And even if it's repaired by the company, they have their insurance plan, or they'll repair it at AT&T, or you'll repair it, or you have to. Do you have any official OEM for parts, or do you have to scrounge from junk basically?
Mostly scrounging.
So I imagine you have piles of parts. You have piles of boards where you've taken off a very common fail part, and there's a bunch of other parts on it that are there, but you never need them. Does that happen?
Yeah, and then everybody goes through them looking for the parts they do need and cursing. That's
Yeah, that man, that I kind of had to deal with that last spring. Like, I know there's like supply shortages right now with other things, but people were still ordering those single-headed controllers for me, and I was having to scrounge. Like, I was having to go to used game stores on eBay. I couldn't just go on Amazon and buy it because Amazon was only delivering essentials, which made no sense if you ask me.
They were
Uh,
delivering dildos here.
that's essential, huh? um, yeah, but my point is, so I was having to scrounge to make those things work, and I'm like, this really sucks. I felt like I was in some sort of post-apocalyptic movie, like trying to make a tailpipe out of a beer can, like Mel Gibson. So, man, so you must have supply issues sometimes, right? Like if you can't scrounge things fast enough, or if you can't source enough junk.
I usually have enough junk. It's for newer devices where it sucks, where I have to someone will go, "What do you mean? This computer's been out for a year. Why can't you fix it?" And I go, "That's not enough." Like I have to for the original MacBook Air that came out in not the original, the original one that didn't suck, the one that the A1369 that came out in 2010. It wasn't until 2013 that I could buy a screen for it. So for the first 3 years that it was out, I was telling people, "Sorry, I can't help you." They go, "What do you mean? This is a 3-year-old laptop," and I'd be telling them it's too new, but that was in my industry vocabulary. To them, they're thinking this is 3 years old. This
Oh,
guy just doesn't want to help me.
so you had to wait until the supply of old or used or damaged units was high enough to create a source for your components.
No, I had to wait until someone at LG decided that they did not care about the restrictions and was willing to sell to someone like me anyway.
Uh,
And then, and
basically,
then
it had to
once that
become
time comes,
obsolete.
then I have to buy like 500 or 600 or 700 because that opportunity may not come again.
Did you say they're chipping the LCDs now as well? I can't remember. I think you made a video about that.
The LCD, no, the LCD's always had an EDID code. It's just that the EDID code that was on the LCD was on the EDID code on the screen. Well, if the one that I put on didn't have the exact same EDID, it just wouldn't work. It used to work, and then with a later software update, it didn't. And people have said, "Why don't you just replace that chip? Or why don't you figure out which chip it is?" Like there's this. So to get it off, I need to use heat, and it's literally right next to the LCD. It's right next to
Oh,
the
you're
panel.
talking about the LCD controller chip?
Whatever the hell has the EDID code on it that's on the LCD control LCD screens.
Oh, it's not a serial number. It's like a part identification number.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, and like that chip is on a board where like if I try to desolder it, I'm 50-50 gonna ruin the screen. So like I was trying this thing like I put a piece of rubber and it's like that didn't work. I tried rubber and aluminum foil and all this other stuff, and eventually I just got frustrated and said fuck it and sold
Are,
myself for
are
90.
you talking about the controller chips that are part of the ribbon cable assembly leading into the LCD? Or was it on the. Oh, man, you're brave to even try that.
I tried like one or
Good.
two, and then I gave up. And recently, I hired people who were actually qualified, unlike me. And one of them, Chris, actually did this with the new one. So with the new MacBook Air, the M1 MacBook uses the same screen as I think the last gen MacBook Air, exact same LCD, but this bullshit EDID code kept it from working. So we tried taking it off of the old screen and putting it onto last year's model screen, and it worked. And he's able to do this because he's actually like good at soldering, unlike me. And
So
he
you're
got it
talking
to
about
work
on flex like this, right?
right next to the flex like that. It's on a board, but it's literally right next to a flex like that immediately winds up
So
getting
this could be
burned.
destroyed.
Yeah, and it's very hard to do it without destroying the screen because also that's very very close to the screen itself, and it's not soldered onto the screen. It's like just I don't know how they attach it.
Right. So you basically have to experiment to find things that are working.
Yeah.
It's really unfortunate. Well, because you're not an authorized repair service, right? But even then, they probably wouldn't give you the data, would they? They would just say, "Okay, you buy this, and it's really expensive."
No, what you do is you buy the entire display assembly for $4 or $5 or $6 or $700,
It's
even though the
really
customer only needs
expensive.
the LCD. I need to replace your hinges, your webcam, your clutch cover, the metal back piece that has the Apple logo on it, your Wi-Fi wiring, and it's like that's a waste. I mean,
So when you do your legislation, say, what if you had to buy a new engine just to get a new oil filter? That's the gotcha question.
the issue that I have there is not with legislators not understanding it; it's that they don't care, which is why I wanted to do the direct ballot thing. And my audience kept asking why I
Right.
don't do it, and then I figured out why I don't do it because it's like it's this insane, stupid amount of money. But
Oh yeah, because you have to have an ad campaign because you have to directly reach the
It's
voters themselves.
constant polling and focus groups to figure out if the opposition advertisements worked. So the whole idea is they release a bunch of ads that are complete bullshit. They don't care if they get fined because the cost of the bill passing to them is far greater than any fine that they'll pay. It's kind of like when Scott Galloway says, there's a meter downstairs and it's $75 an hour to park, but the ticket is 25 cents. Like, you're not going to use the meter. You're just going to get a ticket. So for them, what they do, it doesn't matter if the ad that comes out is garbage. Like for the Massachusetts right to repair, when they had this woman in a parking lot opening her car, and there was sinister music playing, and then there was someone walking up, and then he attacks the woman, and they said vote no on question one. It's with the assumption being that people will stalk you to your car and kill you in a parking garage if independent techs get access to a OBD port wirelessly.
Yes, because no one has ever stalked someone to a parking garage before we had right to repair.
Yeah, everything law and order is complete. It's not
Yeah,
based
this is
on
all
anything.
your fault. All assaults are your fault now.
And that, yeah, that was the
That's
frustrating
that's
part.
hilarious.
So
That's
you have to constantly figure out if the ad that they did landed, and the way that you do is you have to poll the specific people that it could have affected, and then you have to make up your own ad, and then they make up an ad, and then you have to poll those people to figure out if it got to them, and if it did, you have to figure out how to answer it in a manner that makes them want to vote for it. So it's
and
this
that's
constant back and forth. The polls are insane amounts of money.
right. So you're fighting against literally trillion-dollar corporations. And yeah, you're right. They could. It's just like lawsuits, right? Like if the company, pretty much any company has more money for lawyers than the average person, so you can't win. They don't out lawyer you, they outspend you, and
I
you're
think
just
I need the minimum amount that would be necessary for me to be able to get my point across. It's kind of like the analogy that I've used is it's kind of like if it's a $20 cab ride for if it's to get to a boxing match is all you needed to be able to fight that night. Like if I have $10,000 and Mike Tyson has 20, he's still gonna kick my ass. Like, all you need is enough money to show up. Once you have enough money, you have your gloves, your sneakers, your cab ride there, you win. Whoever's the better fighter. And I think all I need is I would just need to collect the bare minimum to be able to hire a firm to handle all of all of this for me, and to be able to get in the ring and make the arguments. And once I do that, I think I have a chance. But they like for the right to repair automotive thing, like they spend $26 million opposing it. So that's the way they explain it is whoever has the loudest megaphone wins.
it's kind of like it's like politics too. Like usually whoever spends the most wins. I mean, not always, but it's just about bombarding people with your message, whether or not it's right or wrong. Just how much you can scream. I mean, one thing I would suggest. I would go really hard. Well, the thing is, if you are going for a direct ballot initiative, you're going to have to do some of this stuff, no matter what. So, I would go really hard into the environmental stuff because I don't necessarily think the average citizen cares all that much, but politicians certainly do. They have to appear to be green, and right to repair is super green. And these companies are, of course, all companies are going to say they're green, but this throwaway stuff is not green. And responsibly recycle it ends up piled in a street in China, but that's not green. So I mean, you should talk about that, like you show like a farmer or something, and like sustainability is an American way, and like keeping our building stuff, blah blah blah. And then, but they want to take that away, and then you show someone like welding the hood of a car shut. Everyone understands cars. That's what I would do. Of course, that's an ad.
Well, the hood of a car shut would actually like really hit people in the emotions.
That would read really well. You just, pay someone, you just do an ad of that. But I mean, it's a pretty good analogy because, again, the average person has never taken apart this, but everyone's hooked up jumper cables. Think about what, because if it's a direct ballot initiative, you're talking to the people, not the politicians. But think about what people can understand, and even if they don't understand phones, make them understand. You could say, what if you couldn't do this, to your car? Sounds like a dystopian future. That's the present when it comes to your phone. If we don't stop them here, where will we stop them? Think about it. Like, I was like, oh, I can call like 10 different people to do new blacktop in my driveway. What if I didn't have that choice? Or what if you didn't have a choice of builders? And that's kind of how it's going. It's already there for like tractors. It's going that way with cars. It's already there for Tesla. And yeah, these things aren't very expensive, but they're essential, and they're something we all need. And also maybe the small business angle, even though like under COVID, have you noticed how like people who used to be pro small business are like anti small business and pro big business now. Like a complete flip flop. I don't know if you've noticed it. I certainly have.
I haven't noticed that.
Well, think about it. Like mom and pop bakery has to close, but Johnson and Johnsons are the heroes. It's
Oh,
kind of backward.
that idea. Yeah, I've seen the uneven application of lockdowns for sure. I thought you meant consumer
Yeah.
sentiment, not law.
Well, kind of. I mean, well, I'm getting off on a tangent there, but anyway. So
Good tangent.
well, I have to jump. I have to bounce in 30 minutes no matter what. So I'll keep my tangents to a minimum. But America, especially like with the decline of factories, we're mostly a service-based economy now in our country. And obviously, well, it's a ballot initiative in Massachusetts. So saying America isn't too restrictive. But think about it. We have people who they weld things, they fix things. They're car mechanics. They're home improvement mechanics. They fix roads. So much of our economy is just fixing things and maintaining things and making them work. And then if we're having these companies say, hey, because we put a microchip in something, you no longer have a choice of who gets to fix it. You only have one choice. You go to like the GM dealer or the Ford dealer. Well, it sounds like you haven't driven cars much of your life, but it's like where if someone takes their Ford to the Ford dealership for repair, they're like a baller. That's like a rich person move. You
Going
right?
to a car dealer to get it fixed instead of going to an independent.
Well, especially if you're off warranty. I mean, if you're on warranty, obviously you go to the dealer. Like nobody would do that. Nobody would take their 10-year-old Ford to a Ford dealer and get it fixed because it's going to cost a fortune. They go down the street or down that street. And that could go away. You let the companies get their way, because who cares about that guy with the small shop or that guy with the small shop? We're going to silo everything into the services division of GM or Ford, because everyone sees like companies like Apple and they're making so much money on their services division. And they're like, wow, we want a piece of that. It's just like subscriptions. Everyone wants a piece of that. Like, oh, we want a monopoly on repair. So I think I would go with that angle. Like, talk about all the things we're used to with repair and how we have so many options. But so with some things, we have even fewer options. And even if you have like actually I had the Pixel 1, right? And it was only 14 months old, and it went into the boot loop death, basically boot loop death spiral or whatever. I could not recover it, and I don't know how to do that. And I called up Google and like, oh, take it to the iFixit store. And I'm like, they're not going to be able to fix this. This is a software issue. So I actually just bought this thing because I had a trip like 2 days later and I had no choices. I needed a phone. But stuff like that. Like you have like these black boxes and it's hard. They're hard that you can't get them fixed everywhere. And restricting those options is not good for people. It basically gives consumers less choice. And when you have less choice, you pay higher prices. So I guess, yeah, just think about things once you get to like the ballot initiative, think about things that you could, use as analogies, and like the car hood, that would be a great visual. If you do that, just credit me. All right. Car hood being welded shut.
I will give you credit. I will purposely, I will make sure to credit you in the commercial.
Thanks. But no, just things that people can understand. Say people are used to like, I choose a plumber, I choose this, I choose this. I should be able to choose this. So yeah, and then I should be able to have the tools to replace it, right? Like if my water heater blows up or my car blows up, the car shop calls O'Reilly, they get the part. What if they couldn't do that? People wouldn't accept that, but that's exactly what happens with their phones. I think the difference is, yeah, you expect your $20,000 car or whatever to be repairable, and maybe this is too throwaway garbage, but it shouldn't be throwaway garbage. And then that's where you go with the environmental angle. We should be able to, for a more sustainable future, we need to keep what we have working longer. And it's against what the companies want, but the companies will want to be green, but this isn't green, but maybe that's the wedge you used against them. You see what I'm getting at?
That makes sense. It's good imagery, a hood being welded shut by someone with some sinister music playing.
Yeah, all desaturated, like clouds in the background. Vote on Proposition 12 or your kids will die. Oh, then, yeah, and then maybe like you've got the helmet or whatever, and then obviously you couldn't do this, but he lifts up the helmet and it's Tim Cook.
Or someone that looks just like him. That would be quality. Or Elon Musk.
Yeah. So anyway, that's what I would suggest. Yeah, just think about ways that it's relatable to everyone. Cars is a great one, and then for the okay. Do you have any other questions? I kind of went off on a tangent there. Sorry.
I'm close to the end.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate talking to you.
Oh, no problem. No
I
problem.
learned two really good things from this. The first is how to come up with something that's more fair to the manufacturer while simultaneously being fair to us, that covers the chips and source code thing. And the second is
Great.
a really good commercial idea.
All right, cool. Oh, and I've been a big fan of yours for a long time. I actually stopped by your shop once, but you weren't there. But maybe next time.
It's possible I was. I told Kevin I'll fire him if he ever tells someone I'm here. But if it was you, I would have said yes.
I think
It had like a white list at the front.
it was like 2 years ago. It was at your old location. I was just passing by anyway. So.
Oh yeah, 2 years ago I was physically incapable of fitting in there, so I had to do all my videos at night.
Oh yeah, because you just had that little section up front, right?
Yeah, my video editor at one point in the old store was actually working in the bathroom, and he would have to leave and go to and go on the sidewalk every time someone wanted to use the bathroom, which was it was bad.
I don't blame you. When we were doing our show, I'd get pissed if the UPS man showed up. So I completely understand. Yes.
Where do you live? Where do you?
I live in Madison, Wisconsin, which is the capital of Wisconsin. So yeah,
Close to where my dad lives. So what were you
where
doing
do
in
you
New
live?
York? He lives in Brookfield.
Oh, in Milwaukee.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, cool. That's awesome. Yeah, small world.
it's a nice place. Every time I visit, I kind of wonder why I come back here. But
Oh yeah, I think if you ever did that, I would say maybe Austin or Atlanta. Because the thing is, New York is like really high Mac usage and people walk. So San Francisco, nobody walks in California, but so I don't think you'll ever find that much of a magic bullet, but you could probably find something good enough, especially if you have all this mail in now, right? Repair.
yeah, there's a lot more mail-in than walk-in. Yet,
Really?
yeah, the walk-in went down significantly because of the whole every business that was my customer not being allowed to stay open.
Yeah, I think about that. Not far from here, there's this big campus. It was like a health insurance company, and it's basically for lease now. Everyone's working from home, and I don't think they're ever going to go back to the building. So I kind of wonder about corporate blight as a result of this. I mean, it'll probably get knocked down and turned into uppy condos, but it is kind of weird. It's a different world. Do you have any other questions you want to ask me today?
No, I'm out of here. Thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Well, it's great to talk to you, and good luck with your
Talking to you
trip.
too.
All right. Have a good weekend.